Hi there. In this video, now we're going to do some transformation of the secant and cosecant graph. We took a look at the parent functions in the original video, but now in this video, I'm going to show you how to do it with the transformation. So how do we graph f of x equals the secant of the quantity of double the angle, theta is your angle, plus pi, this quantity minus 1. So first let's make a chart of values, just like we did with our transformation of sine and cosine. First, let's find its cycle, or the period. Okay. Remember in the parent graph for cycle, its period was 2 pi. Same thing here, it's 2 pi and it's divided by your k term, and the k term here is 2. So if you take 2 pi and divide it by 2, the period is pi, which means this will go from 0 to 180 degrees to complete one cycle, and then it repeats again. Okay? What's the phase shift that's moving it to the right or the left? Remember, the phase shift is opposite of the c term over the k term? Well, your c term is positive pi, and the opposite of positive pi is negative pi. And your k term is 2. So the phase shift is negative pi halves, which means if you compare this graph to the parent graph, it's shifting all the coordinates 90 degrees to the left. Vertical shift, remember that's if we're going to shift it up or down. Minus 1 says we're going to have a vertical shift down 1. And what should we make the increments be along the x-axis? Remember, that's a quarter of the period, and the period is pi. So 1/4 of pi is pi 4. So that tells us along the x-axis, go by increments of pi 4 till you get to pi. Show one positive cycle, one negative cycle, and the vertical shift is down 1. All right, so I think if we go up and down 3 units, we'll be perfectly fine. So along our y-axis, 1, 2, 3. Then down 3. And the reason I'm saying that is the vertical shift moved the midline from the x-axis down 1. Okay, and then from here we should have enough below and enough above. Make your increments along your x-axis go by pi fourths. 0 plus pi fourths is pi fourths. Pi fourths plus pi fourths is 2 pi fourths, which simplifies to pi halves. Add another pi fourths and you'll get 3 pi fourths. Add another pi fourths, that gives you 4 pi over 4, which is pi. And that completes one cycle. So that's a positive cycle on your x-axis. And then repeat on the left so you have a negative cycle. Negative pi fourths, negative pi halves, negative 3 pi fourths, and negative pi. Okay, it might help if you have your unit circle in front of you, and we're going to evaluate it by replacing theta with the angles along our x-axis. So if I replace theta with 0 radians, 2 times 0 is 0, and 0 plus pi is pi. What's your secant at pi? Well, pi, your x-coordinate is negative 1. Secant is 1 over that. 1 over negative 1 is negative 1, and negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. So plot a point at 0, negative 2. Now go to pi fourths and replace theta with pi fourths. What's 2 times pi fourths? Well, 2 times pi fourths is 2 pi fourths, which simplifies to pi halves. So if you're at pi halves and you add pi, that brings me to 3 pi halves. Well, my x-coordinate 3 pi halves is 0, therefore secant is 1 over 0, which is undefined. And if it's undefined and I subtract 1, it's still undefined. So a pi fourths, to show that it's undefined, I put in a dashing line. Now replace theta with pi halves. 2 times pi halves is pi, and pi plus pi is 2. What's the secant at 2 pi? That would be 1 over 1, which is 1, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So pi halves, I plot 0. Now replace theta with 3 pi fourths, and 2 times 3 pi fourths equals 3 pi halves. So if you're at 3 pi halves and you add pi, that brings you to 5 pi halves. Well, 5 pi halves sits on top of pi halves. And the secant there, your x-coordinate is 0, and 1 over 0 is undefined. If it's undefined and you subtract 1, it's still undefined. So to show that it's undefined, I put in a dashing line. Now replace theta with pi. 2 times pi is 2 pi. 2 pi plus 1 pi is 3 pi. What's your secant at 3 pi? Well, remember 3 pi sits on top of pi. Your x-coordinate there is negative 1. 1 over negative 1 is negative 1, and negative 1 minus 1 is negative 2. Okay, that completes one period, one cycle. Negative 2 undefined, 0, undefined, negative 2. Therefore, at negative pi fourths, we are going to be undefined. You're looking at the pattern. Negative pi halves, we're going to be at 0. And you can plug them in and evaluate it. Negative 3 pi fourths is undefined. Negative pi, you're at negative 2. Remember, upper point gets an upper curve. Lower point gets a lower curve. Upper point gets an upper curve. Lower point here. You can do the right-hand side, but you don't need to because that's where the graph ends. Remember, there should be dead space in the middle, and that's where the cosine function would go because secant is the reciprocal function of cosine. Okay? So that's a transformation of secant. Let's take a look at a transformation involving cosecant. So let me erase this one, and let's try another one. And once again, when I upload this video, I'm also going to upload my notes so that you can follow along with the notes. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Let's do g of x equals 2 times cosecant of the quantity of double theta minus pi, this quantity minus 1. All right, let's jot down some things we know. Let's find the period. We know the period is 2 pi divided by k. So this would be 2 pi divided by what you're multiplying the angle by, which is 2, and 2 pi divided by 2 is pi. Phase shift. Phase shift is the opposite of the c term over the k term. The opposite of negative pi is positive pi, and the k term is 2. So this is saying that this is taking the parent function and shifting all the coordinates 90 degrees to the right. What's our vertical shift? Are we moving this up or down? We're moving it down 1. And what should the increments be along the x-axis? It's a quarter of the period, and the period's pi. And a quarter of pi is pi fourths. So let's draw our x and y axis. Along your y-axis, as long as you go up and down 3 units, I think we'll be fine. Oops, 1, this should be 2. And then 3, then down 3. And then along our x-axis, we're going to go by increments of pi fourths. 0 plus pi fourths is pi fourths. Pi fourths plus pi fourths is 2 pi fourths, which simplifies the pi halves. 2 pi fourths plus another pi fourths is 3 pi fourths. 3 pi fourths plus another pi fourths is 4 pi over 4, which simplifies the pi, and that's your x-axis. That completes one cycle. Now do a negative cycle. Negative pi fourths, negative pi halves, negative 3 pi fourths, and negative pi. Okay? Let's evaluate this. Replace theta with 0. 2 times 0 is 0. 0 minus pi is negative pi. Well, negative pi sits on top of pi. What's the cosecant at negative pi? Well, what's your y-coordinate at negative pi? Your y-coordinate negative pi, or pi, is 0. 1 over 0 is undefined. If it's undefined and I multiply it by 2 and subtract 1, it's still undefined. So I'll put a dashing line in there to show that it's undefined. Now replace theta with pi fourths. What's 2 times pi fourths? Well, 2 times pi fourths is 2 pi over 4, or pi halves. If you're at pi halves and you subtract pi, that brings you to 3 pi halves. Cosecant at 3 pi halves would be 1 over negative 1, which is negative 1. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2, and negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. So I'm going to plot a point at negative 3. Replace theta with pi halves. 2 times pi halves is pi. Pi minus pi is 0. What's your cosecant at 0? Well, that's 1 over 0, and 1 over 0 is undefined. And if it's undefined and I multiply it by 2 and subtract 1, it's still undefined. So you put a dashing line in to show that it's undefined. Now replace theta with 3 pi fourths, and 2 times 3 pi fourths is 3 pi halves. So start at 3 pi halves and subtract 1. That brings you to pi halves. What's your cosecant at pi halves? Well, that'll be 1 over 1, which is 1. 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 minus 1 is 1. So plot a point at 1. Now replace theta with pi. 2 times pi is 2 pi. 2 pi minus pi is 1 pi. Cosecant at pi is 1 over 0, which is undefined. And if it's undefined and you multiply it by 2 and subtract 1, it's still undefined there. So we put in a dashing line. So we're undefined, 1, undefined, negative 3, undefined. If you evaluate negative pi fourths, do you see that you're going to be back at 1? If you evaluate at negative pi halves, it's undefined. If I evaluate negative 3 pi fourths, I'm at negative 3. And if I evaluate negative pi, I'm undefined. Lower point is going to give me a lower curve. Upper point is going to give me an upper curve. Lower point, lower curve. Upper point, upper curve. Make sure you have that dead space in the middle because that's where the sine function would go. All right, so now I did a transformation, one of secant, one of cosecant. I'm going to give you 4 to try on your own. So I'm going to turn this video off, and then the third video is just going to be the assignment up here.